Hello and welcome back to the My Two Sat Show. I'm joined today by Cole Walmsley, author of the Beyond Infinity newsletter, one of my absolute favorite newsletters. And I rarely subscribe to email newsletters. They're very mundane and boring, but I absolutely love Cole's because it's very unique and thought provoking. It's really not your run of the mill Bitcoin related stuff, talking about price or any of that. It goes a lot deeper. So I'm really excited to dive down some rabbit holes with you today, Cole. Welcome to the show. Looking forward to getting your two sats.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
How you been doing? You've been writing a lot of newsletters lately, putting out some great stuff. Lots of stuff swirling around the head.
That's right. Always working on the Bitcoin thesis pretty much every day, except Sundays, and writing newsletter posts, writing Twitter posts, working for 821 Digital, which I just started working with a few weeks ago. So a lot of writing, a lot of stuff coming from the brain up top.
Awesome. And I think I'm number one on the list for a signed copy of the new book. So really looking forward to seeing you get that published.
Yeah, it'll be great. You'll definitely get a signed copy coming your way for sure.
Amazing, man. Well, we got a lot to cover, so we're not going to bullshit back and forth too much here. Let's just dive into the good stuff, man.
Let's do it.
We got a lot of current news that we could talk about, and we got a lot of philosophical rabbit holes to dive down. And first, I think let's start with the El Salvador deal. There's a lot of Bitcoiners that moved to El Salvador thinking that they were moving to the promised land and that Bukele was going to continue, stacking Bitcoin. But now it looks like there's a lot of confusion there. The IMF has come out and said, no, you can't mine Bitcoin, you can't buy Bitcoin, and you have to cease those activities. And Bukele's kind of come out on the timeline and said, that's not exactly true. So there's not a lot of clarity there. Hopefully we'll get some, but what do you make of all of that right now?
Yeah, I think it's a bit confusing, and I've heard some stuff that the limitation or the restriction on them buying Bitcoin won't trigger until later this year. Bukele's come out and said that he's still buying a Bitcoin a day and that's not going to go away. I don't know. I don't really support public governance structures in general, and Bitcoin doesn't really care either. So I don't really care because I think they're all zeros in the long run, which I've talked about recently with the United States adopting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It just doesn't really add up with Bitcoin and verifiable proof of work again in the long run. So it's like kind of a non-factor for me mostly, which is why I haven't really broken it down too deeply in my own mind and done a ton of research about it because it's like, does it really move the needle for me too much? It is a little bit of a bummer, I'm sure, for the Bitcoiners that have moved to El Salvador to kind of lose a little bit of support from the top-down structure that's was built in place for Bitcoiners to kind of come in and adopt. So that must be a little bit frustrating, but we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and you touched on also, the strategic reserve, and there's a lot going on with that right now. But I think what is very interesting to me is in the early days of Bitcoin, it was about separation of money and state, and now you see a lot of Bitcoiners bending over and kind of begging daddy government to, include us and not them. It's really weird to me, and I'm sure it's pretty weird to you as well.
Uh-huh.
Let's kind of break down, like, why is it important to separate money from state, and why do we kind of not need or want a strategic reserve, or just don't care one way or the other? But what's important about separating Bitcoin from state?
Yeah, I think it's really about, at like the deepest, most fundamental level, it's about somebody else controlling our energy, and our money is a form of energy. It's economic energy for us. And for somebody to have the monopolized ability, being the Federal Reserve or really any central bank, in line with the government to control and manipulate and really print our energy at will, that's a quite abusive power, and one that's really had a lot of negative effects over the past 100 plus years, because printing energy and controlling somebody else's energy really goes against the laws of the universe and creating energy without transferring it from one form to another. So really just eliminating the ability for anybody to control and print and manipulate our monetary energy, and rather give us that power, that sovereignty back to ourselves as individuals, to go out and provide value so that we can fairly earn it in line with the laws of the universe. That's really the essence of separating money from state. It's not necessarily just money from state. It's separating money from any centralized authority in general, whether it's a corporation, a business, a CEO of Ripple. It's putting money and the power of our energy back in our hands and our individual sovereignties. That's really the power of it. And that's why I don't really buy into the whole strategic Bitcoin reserve and needing, as you say, daddy government to support Bitcoiners and adopt and buy Bitcoin. It's like, it doesn't really matter in the long run because the power is moving to the individual and the decentralized structures that are starting to form. And public governance structures are centralized by nature. So they're really, again, like I said, zeros in the long run. And it's like, well, what is a country like the United States even going to do should they adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Okay, they buy 100,000 Bitcoins. Well, they're using stolen money via taxation or printed money, which steals value via inflation. So I don't know how that really is conducive to a beneficial environment for everybody, if that's the case. And then additionally, they have the Bitcoins. What are they going to do? If they buy and hold it, well, then that's not productive at all. Or are they going to spend it, which also isn't productive because the way they spend it isn't bound by private market forces. So they can spend it on whatever they want, just as they've done for, 100 plus years now with no real opposing market forces to, okay, well, you have $36 trillion in debt. You shouldn't be in business anymore. But because they're the government, they make the rules and they're public, they're not out of business. They still survive. So there's really no way for us to verify the productivity of how they're going to, the productive use of how they're going to spend the Bitcoin. And really, that's why I don't think it's productive for Bitcoins to be in the hands of governments, especially the United States and really all centralized forms of governance. And in the long run, they're all just going to be decentralized forms of governance in mass amounts and quantities all over the world and that are private, bound by the free market. And thus they'll have to produce and present valid and honest forms of productivity, essentially proof of work to the market. And if they don't, then they'll go out of business, just like any bad restaurant or whatever it is that's being presented to the private market.
Yeah, amazing points there. And it's like centralized governments and centralized control structures are antithetical to Bitcoin and proof of work
Exactly.
anyways, right? So imagine if your government or your, these decentralized entities moved more towards a decentralized ethos and they actually had to produce value to acquire the Bitcoins like we do as individual human beings. And that's why government tends to be so anti-human, right? It's like you just said, think of the way that they acquire those Bitcoins. They print money out of thin air to acquire them. They steal them, right? Or take them from somebody else, or they, like we've seen for hundreds of years, go to war and acquire them in various ways that are anti-human. And I think, that past just, we want a money that's sound. We want a money that's humane, right? We want something that is more in line with human nature. And if the way that government is getting it doesn't fall in line with that, I mean, it's not helpful for us.
Agreed. Those are really all violent forms of acquisition, which Bitcoin, the network, Bitcoin, the protocol, is a non-violent network. I saw somebody commented under one of my Twitter posts the other day, thank you, Satoshi, for giving us a money where violence cannot exist. Because if you do not cooperate within the Bitcoin network, you'll be kicked out. If you're dishonest, you'll be kicked out. If you're unfair, you'll be kicked out. And so if we move the foundation of the world to that protocol that's only based on verifiability, proof of work, honesty, fairness, truth, really, well, then everything built on top of it will also run the same way. And that leaves no room for the corrupt, deceiving, violent, dishonest governance structures that we have today. As I talked about a few days ago, there's really no entity or structure in the world that is less honest or less productive than governance structures today, like the United States. Who lies and deceives more than politicians? and their closest counterparts. Really, nobody. Who is less productive than the government? Who has more than $36 trillion in debt and counting? Nobody. There's really nobody that's been less productive and less honest. That's their track record. And because we're moving to verifiable proof of work based on truth and honesty, there's just no room for that in the Bitcoin world, which I'm super pumped about.
Yeah, no wonder they're afraid of it and are
Exactly.
trying to co-opt it, if you will. It's like now they can be held accountable because they really aren't proof of work entities, right? And so like once that's
Uh-huh.
kind of exposed for everybody to see, I think more and more people will sort of be like, "Oh, wow, this isn't an entity that serves me as a human being." And to that point, you've warned against viewing Bitcoin through a fiat lens. So
Yeah.
philosophically, like how does Bitcoin demand a new way of thinking? And why do you personally feel
Mm.
it's so hard for people to escape that fiat mindset that they have?
I'll answer the second question first. I think it's because that's really all they know, and that's what they've grown up into, and they've been fed that information and that way of thinking for basically their whole lives. When I was in school, I didn't know any better. It wasn't until I unplugged from the matrix and started looking at the system from an outsider's perspective that I really started to see what was going on. And that was when I decided not to go to college and to walk a different path. And then what was your first question?
Yeah, so you've warned against viewing Bitcoin through a fiat lens. How
Mhm.
does Bitcoin demand a new way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it demands that you view things from an individualistic perspective first, because I think the Bitcoin movement starts and ends with the individuals within the network and their sovereignties and the sovereignties and the power that we have. So it starts really from a grassroots side of things. In line with that is a decentralized way of thinking where the power doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up. And all of the structures that really have been built on this centralized foundation that we have today, mega corporations, monopolized industries, all of those are really going to be flipped. Like one thing I've talked about is the rise of the mom and pop that will kind of rebirth in the Bitcoin world that we've seen eliminated today because of centralized fiat. And so it's really an opposite shift and really a mental model that I tend to go back to from a simplistic way is whatever fiat is, you can kind of just go to the opposite end of the spectrum with Bitcoin, and that's more or less how it's going to look. So centralized fiat, decentralized Bitcoin, inflationary fiat, deflationary Bitcoin, violent fiat, non-violent Bitcoin, dishonest and honest. So you can kind of go back and forth between those as kind of a lens to look through whatever it is you're trying to analyze and evaluate with Bitcoin. That's kind of how I've tend to approach it.
Yeah, and in line with the mom and pop revolution, if you will, it one of the first ideas that really struck me in Bitcoin was sort of the idea that as we shift or if we shift to a Bitcoin centric world, you'll be able to actually get your worth paid to you by people that hold Bitcoin. You'll really
Mhm.
have to earn it. It won't be something that's just given lightly, right?
Uh-huh.
And when you work in these giant fiat mines, right, whether it be like a factory or a fast food restaurant or any of these things, they don't value your productivity, they don't value your time, they don't value your character, nothing. And I think that's a symptom of the money being worthless, right?
Uh-huh.
And it really struck me one day so clearly, like, man, if I want people to pay me in sats, I have to really provide them value. And that levels you up, right? That's sort of like where I think we're going to be returning is that you're going to value money again because you have a harder money, a more perfect money. And that's going to help raise the quality of your work and the quality of life. And it's really going to take a lot for somebody to want to part with their sats. We know that as Bitcoiners, but they are willing to do so if you're willing to provide and able to provide them with something that they value in return.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. I think the like if you yourself had a money printer that you could press endlessly and print an infinite amount of money, you'd go and buy everything, you'd fund anything and everything. There wouldn't really be any cost of capital. There wouldn't be any scarcity preventing you from allocating capital poorly. Whereas if you only had a little bit of a finite amount of money, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to be very selective about where I put it here. And then when you combine the fact that the money that you have that is ultimately scarce, but it actually appreciates in value, thus if you don't spend it today, it'll have a greater purchasing power tomorrow. Thus you'll be even more selective about how you spend your money today because you know if you don't, you can spend it greater tomorrow with your extra purchasing power. So this, as you touched on, builds the incentive structure for producers to continuously provide and produce higher and higher value products and services to the market in order to receive the Bitcoin from people that own Bitcoin. Because if you don't produce something of high value, I'm not going to give you my scarce Bitcoin that's going up forever. I'm just going to hold on to it and give it to somebody else that produces something of high value. So it continuously eliminates the stuff that's low quality and low value and replaces it with stuff that's higher quality and higher value, which is, again, the exact opposite of the fiat world today, which is, again, a great thing.
Yeah, and you touch a lot in your writings about incentive structures, and we just kind of tiptoed around it there as well. It's like we're seeing it now with, this new Department of Government Efficiency in the States and how they want to go around and eliminate some of that, useless spending. We don't need to go too deep into that, but it kind of rings true with what you're saying in that money is easily created and very close to valueless. And look how easily the misaligned incentives have taken root and how easily that money is pissed away and spent on things that don't matter, don't produce any value, and even are fraudulent with a lot of the things that they're finding, right? So it's not really surprising, and I think Bitcoin really does help solve that. We won't run into people doing that with their
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm writing about in my book right now is the beauty of Bitcoin incentives. And I'm talking about fiat currently. Essentially, fiat creates a high time preference society where life perpetually gets worse because we're constantly sacrificing tomorrow for today because foundationally the money is worse tomorrow than it is today. And so we don't really care about tomorrow and building and planning for the future. We'd rather speculate and borrow today. Like if you had money and it lost 50% of its value tomorrow, you'd either spend it all today so you could maximize its purchasing power. You'd go out and gamble it on something to receive more money before it loses half its value, or you'd take more money from the future so that when tomorrow comes around, you have more money and you can maintain that same level of purchasing power. But all of those things hurt tomorrow because when tomorrow comes, you've either spent it and you don't have anything. You've either introduced risk because you've gambled it, or you've added a debt burden onto your lifestyle. And we've seen the result of that with fiat. People are consuming more than ever. They're gambling and speculating more than ever. But crypto is a great example of that. And debt levels are continuing to rise higher and higher with each passing second. That's just a product of fiat.
Yeah, exactly, brother. And I was gonna say, like, you kind of touched on it at the end there. You can see the result of that in people's lives, right? Like the way they go about, and it might not be conscious, like that they understand that about their money, but you can see it reflected in the choices that they make in everyday life and why so many people are depressed, stressed out, on anxiety and depression medication. They're living for today only. They're not living for tomorrow. And their money really does kind of encourage that. Again, whether they're cognizant of it or not, that's exactly what's happening. And they're on a hamster wheel or on a treadmill, and they'll never ever reach the end of that. And it's sad, but you can see that with like a large percentage of society that's what's happening. And Bitcoin really does present the alternative to that, and it presents an escape hatch for that kind of hamster wheel.
Agreed. Yeah, it is sad. And it's like, have you ever played Mario on Nintendo 64 and like you go up those stairs and you're like, oh, you're going up for 10 minutes, and then you look back and you've only gone up 5 steps, and then you go back up and run another 10 minutes and are like, I'm still only up 5 steps. Bitcoin is the cheat code to actually go up the steps forever and reach the promised land. And I think you touched on it, it's a very subconscious thing, I believe. And I used to play poker like 4, 5, 6 days a week for multiple hours a day. And that's obviously a form of gambling. I enjoy it, I still do, but I rarely play at all now because I could instead just hold my Bitcoin instead of going out and risking it at the poker table. Of course, I can make more money, but subconsciously I've been much less interested in playing just because Bitcoin exists, and I know I can hold on to it and accrue greater purchasing power over time, and thus I can go out and buy and spend my money on other things that bring me joy.
Yeah, you have your time back and you've gotten rid
Yeah.
of degenerate tendencies, just through understanding money and Bitcoin better. So I think that's amazing. And I know in my personal life, it's stopped a lot of my bad habits cold turkey, right? Things that I had previously struggled with, like, I mean, hell, why not just be honest with smoking weed, right? I
Uh-huh.
used to struggle with that and I don't do it at all anymore. I was able to just quit and like learning about Bitcoin every day helped me stop that, like without any hesitation or regret. Just one day, done. And it's because it started to sink in more deeply, like, A, this money could be going to Bitcoin, and B, this is keeping me sedated and numb and dumb, and I have hope for the future now, for a better tomorrow, because of Bitcoin.
That's a big word, hope, and the subconscious kind of like inner workings that it provides for us and our beings. Because when our money loses value tomorrow, it's like, we don't really have much hope. Let's just go and gamble it on black or whatever. In my age, in my generation, gambling, sports gambling is just accelerating at exponential rates. It seems like everyone's throwing money on, the tonight's sports game. And I used to sports gamble. I love sports, and yeah, I'll be the first to admit that throwing money on a game makes it more exciting. But when you have scarce money that appreciates over time, you have hope for tomorrow, and thus you don't need to acquire that hope via, a money line on some random sports team that you have no control over. And instead, you can kind of bring your energy back to where you are now, gain back your time as you touched on, and go and produce value somehow so that you can build and stack and stack and stack and grow alongside your Bitcoin, and kind of eliminate all of your bad habits along the way, as you touched on there. And it's amazing what it does for us subconsciously. And there's so much that you could get into and exploring and discovering how it affects us.
Yeah, it's so beautiful and powerful. Bitcoin really frees you more than, oh, number went up in my account, in my wallet. It really
Yeah.
just makes you a better person if you take the time to internalize the lessons that come along with it. And Fiat doesn't do that. So I'm grateful for that. You don't need that artificial stimulus of sports betting or drugs or distraction, basically, to
Hmm.
give you something. You get it, you get it in everyday life now. So
Yeah, it's
it's a
baked in.
blessing.
It's baked in. And I've been thinking about this over the past couple of weeks, kind of like why I care about Bitcoin so much. And I've thought about it for a while, but one of the biggest kind of like aha moments for me thinking about it was I care about Bitcoin so much because I think it's the greatest lever to pull right now to raise consciousness globally, because it helps us tap into our true natures, tap into our hearts by giving us our time back and giving us hope and optimism for the future. And it really just lights our souls on fire in the best way possible. And like, that's like, what more can you ask for as a human being here on earth, is like to walk down your unique path fully and wholly without having to worry or dread about the future because you own money that sucks and loses purchasing power. And yeah, by the world adopting the Bitcoin standard, we can all start to tap into that individually. And the truth and the goodness and the prosperity and beauty that will sprout from that, us giving our gifts fully, is going to be unimaginably amazing, beyond our greatest dreams, collectively and individually. And that's the world that I want to live in. That's the world I want for my kids. That's the world I want for my grandkids and beyond, for infinity. So I think that's why I care about it so much. And that's why I dedicate so much energy to learning about it, talking about it, expressing it, and sharing it with all that are willing to hear about it, because it matters so much for us.
I don't think anything else really has a shot at that, right? Like when you
Right.
think about it, everything else, like, okay, people turn to religion. It's divisive. It's very combative between
Hmm.
religions, and that's gone on for thousands of years, right? Like, it's not government, it's not religion, it's just there's nothing really that has the right incentive structures and has the power to really fundamentally kind of quote change the world that we're living in, right? Like, be the change that we want to see. Bitcoin does that,
Hmm.
and you laid that out very well there. It kind of made me wonder, do you think Satoshi intended some of those deeper philosophical or metaphysical changes, or do you think it was just about finding better money? Like, how much thought do you think maybe went into like this is going to fundamentally change humanity in the sense of giving them their time back, making them better people, all those kinds of things that we've been talking about?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think he almost stumbled into it, but at the same time, he had a very solid grasp and understanding of sound economic principles and what a sound, fair, open, and honest monetary system would look like and the benefits for that, because he obviously saw the evils of central banking and the fiat system and knew how that was affecting us to some degree negatively. And that was kind of his inspiration for crafting Bitcoin and creating it. So he had to have some level of understanding of how this is hurting us, and thus had to have some level of understanding of how it could benefit us to adopt and move into a new monetary system away from centralized fiat. So I think he knew what it was about to a pretty solid degree, but at the same time, just like anybody down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you really don't know truthfully how beautiful it is, because it's infinitely beautiful and brilliant in all of the best ways we can imagine and beyond. So I don't think he could really fully understand it, just like really nobody can.
Yeah, it's a living, evolving thing. It's not
Yeah,
static and
it's
stale.
an
So
organism.
yeah, absolutely. You've also described Bitcoin as a monetary singularity, a point where all economic systems converge. Philosophically, does this imply to you that Bitcoin is more than a technology and kind of a metaphysical inevitability tied to our human nature and scarcity?
I think a monetary singularity is an inevitability because a single global monetary standard is what's most efficient and most optimal. Uh, and humans and really forms of intelligence in general just have a wiring for efficiency and optimal systems. So I think that was an inevitability. And then it being Bitcoin is just, that's kind of the name for what sprouted up as the solution. Ultimately, I think Bitcoin, itself is really just a protocol and a software for a payment system that's peer to peer. And then how we use it and view it and adopt it, it's kind of up to us individually, but it's really just laying the foundation on the base layer for us to have an open and truthful, verifiable system for everybody to access that nobody can tamper with, so that we can all coordinate and cooperate globally, instantly, verifiably anywhere in the world. And yeah, we can build on top of that. So where it goes from there, who knows? I think the singularity I don't think it's more than it necessarily is. I think what is built on top of it is separate from it, but at the same time, it couldn't be built without Bitcoin. And that's what's exciting, is what's going to be built on top of it and what will sprout from Bitcoin, what's already sprouted from Bitcoin, and what will continue to be. That's the most exciting part of living, is the unknown, uncertainty, and beauty that's coming our way, um, despite us not knowing.
Yeah, and we've seen an amazing amount of good that's come from Bitcoin, right? Whether it be on
Uh-huh.
a personal level, like we've been talking about so far, or tech stack wise, right? All, Bitcoin mining, energy, nature, helping impoverished people in, authoritarian countries. There's privacy tools. There's so much that has really sprung from Bitcoin. So I love the sort of line of thought of, what will be, and things are just going to keep growing out of this and benefit us as we go along. So tied to that question, if Bitcoin becomes the global standard, does it erase the diversity of human economic expression? Or to you, does it kind of liberate it by removing centralized distortion?
The diversity of economics expression, I think it liberates it and fully unlocks it, because I think each of us as individuals are diverse in our gifts and our expressions and what resonates with us and what we want to create and bring to the world. And fiat kind of boxes us in because we have to go and work for the system at an increasing rate just to survive and get by. Whereas Bitcoin does the opposite. It increasingly gives us our time back so that we don't have to go and work a nonsense job, on the corner, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, whatever, just to get by. Instead, the money does that work for us at an increasing rate again, in line with the productivity increase globally. And thus, then we can tap into our unique nature and our expression and give that to the world. And then that increases the global diversity and the economic expressions of all of us individually, but, you know, added up collectively, that increases the diversity. So I think it liberates it for sure.
Amazing. You tend to see across the board, it's not always going to be like absolute, but I've noticed that Bitcoiners are generally happier people. They're more self actualized, they're more expressive, they're more in love with life. And I think that has a lot to do with what you just mentioned in your answer there, right? Is that they're not having to go slave away at these things that they suck the soul out of them, right? That they absolutely hate doing with their limited time on earth and their limited energy. So it really is a powerful tool in that regard. You don't see a lot of Bitcoiners dreading their day. They look
Yeah.
forward to it.
Yeah. And it's not like a end all be all solution, but it lays the foundation for us to tap into free time and really just gain our time back individually, which is like that lays the foundation for us to tap into our nature. It wasn't until, again, as I touched on, I unplugged from the matrix from something that was sucking the soul out of me, which was the traditional public academic system. That's when I started to tap into my own free time and my own unique expression. And that's when things really started to manifest in true and beneficial ways for me and for my heart and my unique expression. And it's kept compounding since then. And then when I found Bitcoin, it just like exploded everything through the roof. And that's just gone on, you know, for the last 3 years was really when I started to research Bitcoin, and I bought Bitcoin at the start of 2023, and my purchasing power is 4x. So essentially my free time has 4x as well, which is 4x my ability to tap into, again, myself and my true expression and what brings me joy and what I, want to do on a day-to-day basis. So I don't have to get up every morning and increasingly dread what's coming. I can actually increasingly enjoy what's coming and be excited about it, which is like, that's such a great gift. And I want everybody to experience that. That's what Bitcoin offers.
Yeah, it's such a blessing that you have that, right? And Jack Mallers kind of talks about that a lot too, right? It's like my life got 50% cheaper this year's, what about yours, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very much in line with what you said there, right? Your free time is 4x or 5x depending, when you buy Bitcoin. And then that really gives you that gift of freedom of, growth and expression. And it's funny because like so many people really like they resist the idea of Bitcoin and they almost think that you trying to share that with them is like that you have some like nefarious intention, right? Like it's an MLM or something, where like you get a kickback and it's
Right.
it's so not, right? It's like if you go and buy Bitcoin tomorrow, like I don't make anything from that, right? Like you're not
Uh-huh.
moving the market with your $100 buy, right? But what it does do is that like you just said, like you want that for everybody. You want that for the people that you love and care about to have their time and their freedom, which is so limited, their time on earth. You want them to have control of that more. So, I wish there was an easier way to get that, your true incentive across to people when you start to teach them or tell them about why Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. It's two things, because one, it's like, well, you can get them to buy it, but I think because Bitcoin is all about individual sovereignty and proof of work, it's also about proof of work from the individual. And
Mm.
it's really all proof of work. So if an individual wants to fully access what Bitcoin offers, they're going to have to do the work. They're going to have to present proof of work to the market in some way, whether it's, buying a book and reading it, learning about it online, listening to podcasts, whatever. But it comes down to the individual again, which is a great thing because we have the sovereign ability to go and learn and ascend and benefit ourselves, but we can't do it for somebody else. So it's like two-sided, but that's kind of how the balancing act. It's like I can hold somebody's hand and go have them buy Bitcoin and send it to a cold wallet. Great. But for them to truly understand and to sleep so well at night because they own Bitcoin and they know they can buy more tomorrow, and that really the world is converging upon it and all of the hope that sprouts from that. Like that's like the true level. And that doesn't come without self research and self proof of work, really.
Thank you for that, man, because that's such a great way of putting it and seeing it and contextualizing it, because you're so right. Like, you could potentially convince somebody to buy it, but that doesn't bring any of those philosophical or ethical or, life benefits with it, right? It's just like, oh, okay, cool. I have this thing that I don't fully understand. How is this useful, right? But if they do the proof of work, surely they'll understand why it's, so important and why you're sharing that with them. So that's more of an act of love to like
Yeah.
not try to push them too far. And I think struggled with that with people close to me, like in my family and stuff, over time. It's like, hey, I know you struggled with money your whole life. I really, I want you to know about this thing that gives you that time and that freedom back. And they're just like, they're not really interested, or they don't really get it or whatever. But instead of letting that bother you, seeing it the way that you just presented it is a really good lens to see it through. It's like, even if they do show up tomorrow and buy it, they're not going to get the actual benefit or the value of it other than number goes up.
Yeah,
So appreciate you putting it that way, man. That's really, really special.
for sure. Einstein said something like knowledge obtained under compulsion bears no hold on the mind, essentially. So if we can be compelling in how we present Bitcoin to somebody else, but if there isn't a natural, true, fundamental curiosity from them to learn about it, then it's really not going to click for them, because it's so exciting when you or me or just any individual goes out on a self-exploration route of learning something, and then they learn it, and then they receive the benefits from that discovery and that learning for themselves. It's like such a beautiful thing, learning is. But we can't learn for somebody else, but we can, if somebody's in a dark tunnel, we can be the light at the end of the tunnel so that they can walk to, but we can't be them in their own sovereignties and walk for them. So it's just talking about what it does for us. And then when somebody presents curiosity to us, that's kind of when we can come in and start to answer some questions for them and start to guide them down different paths and stuff. And I've had some friends that have been drawn to Bitcoin on their own, and I talk about it a lot, so they hear about it, but it's not like I'm forcing them and coercing them to learn about it. Of course not. But some people have gotten back to me and asked questions, and I've been happy to answer and help them along the way. Yeah. Be the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Do you often write about the fixed monetary supply of Bitcoin as a core feature, right? Does
Mhm.
absolute scarcity inherently favor those who adopt it early, or is there an ethical tension between sort of egalitarian access and the inequality it might perpetuate? Like, is being fixed a good thing if it only favors early adopters? And how do you see that whole angle?
I think it benefits everybody. I think, sure, it benefits the early adopters, but they also took on the greatest risk. Like, if you mined the Bitcoin in the first 9 months, you were expending monetary resources, resources from the physical world, computers and electricity, to mine and earn something that was completely worthless. And thus you're taking on a massive level of risk. Whereas today, if I were to go and attempt to mine Bitcoin, I know there's a $2 trillion of capital backing my dedication of energy there. So the risk is lower. And so the reward might not be the same per se, but ultimately Bitcoin is going up forever. So anybody that taps into it at any point along the way receives the appreciation and monetary purchasing power, that's really like the number go up technology that's fundamental to a fixed monetary supply in a world where everything else is going up, and that's infinity divided by 21 million. And it's, I think the true value of Bitcoin is infinity. So it's like, whether you buy into it, today, or you start earning Bitcoin 25 years from now, you're still going to have money that's worth an infinite amount of value, and thus you'll benefit from it. You might not have taken the same amount of risk, but you'll still benefit from it. And that's part of the beauty of Bitcoin too, is that everybody always will benefit from it continuously over time.
There's a bit of a risk reward curve to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if Bitcoin's scarcity drives everything else to zero over time, which we know it has been, are we morally okay with a world where non-Bitcoin holders are effectively priced out of economic agency?
Non-Bitcoin holders You got some questions. What do you mean priced out of economic agency? Meaning they can't like participate in the economy? They can't.
Yeah, well, I mean, the value of everything against Bitcoin is going down over time,
Yeah,
right? It's trending towards nothing, let's
yeah,
say, or very little compared to Bitcoin. So, in a world where, let's just say, Bitcoin is the standard in the monetary system, there's people that don't want to participate in that, or they haven't been participating in that. They're effectively priced out of, the economy in some ways.
yeah. I see what you're saying. My question would be, how would they not be able to participate in it? Because if it's the money that everybody's using, unless you're like a hunter-gatherer or you're a monk in the mountains of India, how would you not be a participant if that's where it's being used everywhere? It's like, a kid is born, a baby, they don't have the individual agency per se to participate in it, but their parents do, unless they provide for them. So,
This is for non-Bitcoin holders. This is for people that are clinging to the fiat system in a world where Bitcoin is the standard or
yeah,
the dominant.
eventually, I think they won't have a choice because their fiat will be worthless. So it's either, okay, hold on to your pieces of paper and die, or go out and produce value and earn Bitcoin. Because at that point, nobody's going to take fiat for their Bitcoin. So you're going to have to produce value somehow. And if somebody doesn't produce value, well, then guess what? You're not going to receive value, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
Creates the
and I,
incentive structure.
I think we see sort of a smaller microcosm of that in countries with like hyperinflation, for example, with like Argentina, right? Where these pieces of paper are realistically utterly worthless, right? Like
Yeah.
all fiat to a degree is, worthless or trending down against Bitcoin. But some of these countries, Venezuela and Argentina and countries in Africa where there's hyperinflation or there's multiple currencies and some aren't taken or accepted or valued at the same rate. It's sort of like an early rumbling of a world where that shift towards Bitcoin being the standard is a good thing, right? Because
Uh-huh.
it's unifying and it's permissionless and it's cross border, right? It's kind of easy to accept something like that compared to all these hyperinflated currencies that are worthless.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why it's an inevitability, and yeah, why Bitcoin is continuing to be converged upon, because it's kind of like flipping a switch. If I have gone, 23 years of my life using the Venezuelan Bolivar, and then overnight I completely adopt Bitcoin, well, my life and my monetary energy has literally flipped a switch overnight. Of course, it doesn't mean I've received a bunch of Bitcoin, because to acquire Bitcoins with Venezuelan bolivars, it's going to come at a high cost relative to the bolivars, but it's provided me hope. Now I'm owning and earning money that's appreciating value over time, and logically, everybody wants to hold the thing that appreciates their purchasing power the most, and does so in the most secure way. And that's really what Bitcoin is, because of absolute scarcity and decentralized verifiable proof of work. So that's an inevitability that it will be converged upon, and I think more and more people are waking up to it. And also something that I've been kind of increasingly understanding is that Bitcoin is being adopted globally at the perfect rate. Like if it was adopted right now globally, we wouldn't have the infrastructure for it to really work. It just wouldn't really make sense. So it's all happening in divine order and timing, as everything always is. So it doesn't need to be like, oh my gosh, we have to get everybody using Bitcoin now. It'll come with time, in due time.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the countries that need it most are the countries that you're seeing the highest rates of adoption, right? Like we don't need
Agreed.
it in the West. I mean, we do obviously at a core fundamental level, but the countries that need it most are the ones with the most brutality and oppression and control, right? I've had Sabina from Tando on here from Kenya, and she gave
Wow.
me amazing insights about, just how adopted and how used it is over there, especially on the Lightning Network. They're paying for things in Bitcoin more than the average Canadian or American or European is. And I
That
think
doesn't
it's
surprise me.
beautiful. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think, yeah, we don't really have the urgency here in the West as we would in somewhere like Venezuela or Africa and things like that. So it's really beautiful and powerful to see how it protects people in those kinds of economies.
Yeah, and that's something I've thought about for a little bit now, is, and it goes in line with really Bitcoin and the grassroots movement in general, starting from the individual uh, and opposing the top-down structure. Because the people at the top with all of the power that have the money printers, they're not going to give it up. They're not really going to want to give it up. But the people furthest at the bottom, those in the global south, globally, and in poor countries that have just been oppressed the most, they have the greatest incentive to adopt Bitcoin today. So I think that's really where the movement's going to start from. We saw a little bit in El Salvador where it was adopted there, and some things have happened, and that's still playing out as we talked about at the start of the podcast. But I think ultimately the quote unquote governmental adoption starts with the third world countries, the developing countries that have been beaten and oppressed by the IMF and those at the top with all of the power, the United States and the G7 and everything like that.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I'm loving every minute of this. This is
Yeah, me
great.
too.
You've taken a hard stance that Bitcoin is the only crypto that matters. And philosophically, is this a rejection of pluralism in monetary systems, or do you just see Bitcoin's dominance as sort of a natural selection process that's more rooted in first principles?
I think it's both. I think because a monetary singularity is an inevitability, and because it's most optimal and most efficient, there's only going to be one money used globally. We've never had the chance as a planet, as a human species collectively, to converge upon a single monetary system because we haven't had an openly accessible, decentralized, unmanipulatable, if that's even a word, uh, monetary system for us to use everywhere in the world. And so Bitcoin is really the first instance of that. And then additionally, I think it is survival of the fittest, and it ties into the laws of nature because if I hold absolute scarcity is the best place to store my energy. That's just what's true. If I hold and store my monetary energy in a less secure, absolutely scarce monetary system, well, that is increasing my chances of dying. It's lowering my odds of survival because it's less secure and less credible. So logically, and really everybody is incentivized to store their monetary energy in the most secure, absolutely scarce network, which is Bitcoin. And no other cryptocurrency can really top that because that would need a repeated, voluntarily stupid decision to constantly occur via a mass number of individuals across the world to store their monetary energy in the less secure, absolutely scarce system, which is essentially choosing to increase their odds of dying more. And you would need humans and really just a form of intelligence to collectively choose to die or increase their chances of dying more than the thing that secures their energy and their chances of survival the best for Bitcoin to be overtaken. So I don't think a second cryptocurrency is really feasible in the long run for all of those reasons. And additionally, Eric Voorhees and the like are like, well, these cryptos have utility. And then I've asked Eric Voorhees, like, what utility does another cryptocurrency have? And Eric said, well, I can stake my ETH without permission and borrow against it. I'm like, okay, well, is you're staking your ETH, you're borrowing against it without permission to then receive another currency. Well, if one currency is only going to be converged upon, how would you stake or, yeah, borrow against your Bitcoin to what? Receive more Bitcoin without permission? Somebody's going to give you their Bitcoin without permission? I don't think that's really how it's going to work. Additionally, if that does have value, and if that were to exist in the Bitcoin world, that utility could be built upon the Bitcoin chain. And Eric even mentioned that he's invested in projects and founders attempting to build that type of thing. So really it comes down to every blockchain relies on the success of its underlying token, and every underlying token in a blockchain that's not Bitcoin is stupid to put your monetary energy in because it increases your chances of dying more because at best it's a less secure, less credible, absolutely scarce monetary system. And so why would I put my monetary energy in Solana or XRP or Doge or some meme coin or whatever and increase my chances of dying if I could just choose Bitcoin. I wouldn't. And the market is increasingly choosing Bitcoin for that reason. That's why Bitcoin has always survived, and thousands and thousands and thousands, and it's going to be millions of cryptocurrencies have just died and gone to zero. So yeah, Bitcoin is the best, and it reigns supreme. And unless something globally catastrophic happens, that's going to be the case.
Yeah, none of these other blockchains or tokens carry any of this philosophical context
Exactly.
with it, right? Like they exist just to exist and extract liquidity. They don't exist for a purpose, right? I'm a sort of a big Nietzsche guy, right? And in the Nietzschean sense, like Bitcoin kind of represents a will to power in monetary form. It's just fucking crushing weaker systems and obsolete, coins and other ideas, don't you think?
I agree. I think, yeah, it's kind of like ruthless in a sense because one thing, it doesn't care about any other cryptocurrency. Second, if you produce something, that's really all of these alternative cryptocurrencies are born from greed, and they're born in a world and from a world where Bitcoin already existed and proved that it had value to the market as a cryptocurrency. Whereas Bitcoin was born from the heart of Satoshi Nakamoto because he wanted to do away with the evils of central banking. And so he created from his unique expression Bitcoin, not to make money from it, not to raise venture capital money, not to pre mine a million coins and dump them on innocent retail investors down the line. He just created it to really fix the world. Whereas everybody else was like, oh, well, this Bitcoin thing is exponentially increased in value. If I can create this new thing, I could theoretically make a bunch of money from it. And that's why you'll see Solana, XRP, Ethereum, really most other cryptocurrencies, they all have pre-mines because they want to guarantee that they can make money from it without having to do proof of work. And they're born from greed, and Bitcoin just has no room for dishonest and invalid forms of productivity because it runs on verifiable proof of work. And all of these alternative cryptocurrencies really they're either dishonest because they're deceiving you and what their true intentions are with creating it, or they're invalid because they prevent some utility that's totally nonsense, and or that Bitcoin can replace and build on its own on a more secure base layer. So they're all just ruthlessly going to be sent to zero by Bitcoin in the long run.
Yeah, and I hope anybody listening to this can kind of clue into Bitcoin's brilliance in that sense, right? We don't have anyone there. I mean, we have people, but we don't have a figurehead there lobbying for Bitcoin to, be valuable. It just inherently is valuable. And we're not trying to get rich or we're not pursuing greed through lack of proof of work like XRP lobbying, for the, inclusion in a reserve. It's
Yeah.
Bitcoin is fundamentally valuable on its own, and all of these other currencies, cryptocurrencies, and blockchains have to go greedily try to replicate the value of Bitcoin and the worth of Bitcoin without producing anything of actual use or value. And that should hopefully, in your mind, listening to this, help you separate these into two distinct different things.
Yeah. Bitcoin came to life and came into existence in a world where no cryptocurrency ever had had a single ounce of monetary value assigned to it. So it would either work because it worked and it truly had value, and thus it would survive, or it would fail and collapse because it didn't. And it proved that it did have value, and thus it was the first cryptocurrency ever to have monetary value assigned to it, despite there being previous attempts. And then it continued to receive more and more value as people increasingly woke up to the fact of how brilliant and beneficial it is for them. And then other people were like, holy shit, this thing is making a shit ton of money. Let me make my own. But all of those birthings of coins existed in a world where something, i.e., Bitcoin, had already proven there to be value in a cryptocurrency, and thus it wasn't immaculate in its conception. And that's why Bitcoin is the immaculate conception, along with Satoshi not profiting a single Satoshi off of his own creation. And it's can't be replicated, it can't be repeated unless you have some sort of time travel machine or a global nuclear bomb goes off and everybody forgets about Bitcoin.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot today about incentives and incentive structures, right? And I was wondering, how do you feel Bitcoin reshapes our understanding of human motivation? Does it reveal us as fundamentally rational actors, or
Huh.
does it expose our greed and fear like these other currencies, cryptocurrency attempts do?
I'm not sure if expose is the right word. I think it irons out our sinful natures because if again, like if I propose something that's dishonest or quote unquote sinful to the Bitcoin network, it won't be accepted. It won't be tolerated. There's a zero tolerance policy for it within the Bitcoin network. So if we move to a world where the foundation is built on verifiable proof of work and verifiable honesty, honest and valid productivity, well, everything that's not that perhaps won't have the same level of ruthless non-tolerance, but there will be an increasing level of non-tolerance for it. And thus, we're going to be incentivized to only produce valid and honest forms of productivity and really and how we express ourselves to the world. And thus, it kind of irons out those sinful natures, greed being a big one for sure, and some of the other stuff as well. But it's also part of being human as well. We're quote unquote imperfect and we have the seven deadly sins within us, but and Bitcoin doesn't solve everything in that sense, but I think it can help iron out those things in the long run.
Beautifully said, man. Beautifully said. Yeah. I'm in agreement with you there. It points out our flaws in a lot of ways and
Mhm.
can help us kind of iron them out, like you said, and come to terms with our human nature and hopefully kind of help reshape them into in a better light.
Yeah, agreed.
Do you find that, or I want you to sort of brainstorm with me on this one, okay? So Bitcoin is the end goal of money, or is it just a stepping stone? How does it immutably square with the idea that change is the only constant? Could something beyond Bitcoin emerge that we can't yet comprehend or imagine? Or is this the end goal for you?
I think it's hard for me to imagine there being a better money than Bitcoin because it's programmable, because it's instantly verifiable and open and unable to be manipulated with a verifiably absolutely scarce supply. So it's tough for there to be a better money, but I think there could be a world where money does not exist because everything is so abundant and intelligence and life on Earth and beyond has evolved and ascended to a point where money is not necessary and we don't really transact and coordinate in that way. But that would come, I think, like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of years down the line. But yeah, I'm not too concerned about that.
That is a beautiful thought, and one I've actually pondered a lot on. Like, we should have, maybe not now, but it should be trending in the direction of absolute abundance in the world, right? Like, we should have enough technology, enough know how, enough love, enough care, enough of an aligned incentive with humanity to the point where we don't need all of this scarcity and restriction in the world and all of this hate and violence and all these other things. I guess it's getting a bit idealistic and philosophical here, but do you think that that's the ultimate like better world and something that we're capable of as humans? And if
Yeah.
so, what's stopped us from getting there? Because we definitely have like the underlying capabilities, right?
Yeah, I think all abundance is already here. Like we have everything that's going to exist already. Like all of the energy that exists is already present. It's not going to be created in some form. It's just a matter of time and advancement and development that it will take for us to tap into that fully to that point where we fully access all of the energy that's present. And really that's all abundance. But again, that's like already here. So it's just a matter of time to where we start to quote unquote figure things out and figure out how to build new energy sites and companies and collect intelligence together to craft ways to tap into that abundance and energy and present it to the world. But it wouldn't ever happen without ultimately a form of money, an absolutely scarce form of money that denominates the value and really the energy that's present, which is infinite properly because of mathematics, right? If I have an infinite amount of value and I denominate it with infinity, it's an undefined output. And that's why fiat really is fundamentally broken. If I have an infinite amount of value and I denominate it with zero, well, that's also an undefined output, and that just doesn't really make sense. But if I have a verifiably absolutely scarce number, i.e., 21 million bitcoins, well, then I'm dividing infinity by a finite number, which accurately computes to infinity. And that's what Bitcoin is. And that's the world we're converging upon.
Well said. Well said. So, sort of a provocative question, maybe in line with some of that, is if Bitcoin is the end game, are we locking ourselves into a system that might stifle future creativity like the fiat system before it did, or no?
I don't know how we would stifle it because the main inhibiting factor today is our money and our time and really our energy, which money in Bitcoin equals both of those things, whereas money today in fiat does not. So, like every single Bitcoin is produced from energy, and the Bitcoin universe is bound by time and the laws of energy as well. And really, our money is a representation of our time and energy, and because our energy can't really be debased, but in fiat it can, but in Bitcoin it cannot. And so I think it's a beautiful creation that allows us to align with time and energy and really just energy fully, and thus the creativity won't be stifled via that main inhibiting factor that is fiat. I don't know how it would be stifled unless something else would occur outside of the planet or outside of the current systems that we're aware of.
Yeah, it's hard to ponder on things like that. Sort of, they're sort of, yeah, not really realistic to call down and think about, right? So that's
They
fair.
are interesting to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see the fiat mindset as a form of like existential cowardice in a sense, like clinging to centralized control because we fear the freedom that Bitcoin might offer the world?
I think it's something, I don't think we fear the freedom. I think well, in a sense, maybe we fear the freedom because the fiat system kind of works in an increasingly corrupt way, and thus they advertise security through their system and through the top-down structure increasingly as well. So it's like, well, give us your freedom and we'll make sure that you're secure. And thus we become more and more attached to that. And then really, as you said, more and more afraid of what it looks like if we detach from that. And now if we detach from that without really a solution, then it's just kind of like we're floating in the abyss, so to speak. But when we actually have a solution that we can plant ourselves on and build from, which is Bitcoin, that gives us a security in the base layer of Bitcoin, but also freedom. I think that's what ultimately is happening. I think there is definitely some fright of like, what does it look like if I unplug from the system? Because there is a certain level of comfort and security that's been presented there. It's like, well, I get my welfare checks, I get my unemployment checks, or I have a salary job, and
Exactly.
it's good enough for me to not step into the unknown and the potential fear that can come with it. But I think that's a leap of faith that is so rewarding. And now that we actually have the solution to where we can plant ourselves and ground ourselves onto a secure form that just really allows us to express and tap into our freedom fully, that's like one of the best things ever, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a vision, a hopeful vision, and a beautiful light in the world. But I think you really nailed it. For me, it's like comfort and security and predictability. People love that shit. They love clinging to that. Like they're comfortably uncomfortable, right? Like
Yeah.
they're not really fulfilled. They're not really happy. They're not really loving life. They know that they're gonna have their bowl of cereal in the morning and go to work and have their smoke break and go home and see their their dog and their kid or whatever, and life will just kind of keep rolling on. But
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what keeps the current system in place. And then at the higher level, like the corruption doesn't want absolute freedom because that takes the control away from the centralized control structures. But Bitcoin is the first thing that I can think of that's ever disrupted that, the control of religion, the control of decentralized structures, and just numb comfort that everybody kind of subscribes to because, well, it's better than not knowing.
Yeah.
And I think Bitcoin offers us the ability to shape our future, which is the ultimate freedom.
Agreed. I think there's a couple of things. Like the more entrenched you get into it, the less willing you are to look at something that is outside of it, because that could potentially hurt you in the sense of, well, I've dedicated so much energy to this system that's failed me. And really, isn't in line with my best interests and truth. And so some people would have to grapple with admitting that and kind of processing that through them as they go into it. Additionally, I think there's a level of understanding when you get down to it. It's like when you talk about comfort and security, well, you're in a system where somebody could extract your wealth instantly because they say so. It's like incredibly insecure and uncomfortable, at least for me. As soon as you move to Bitcoin, you're in the most secure and quote unquote comfortable, predictable system in the world. And your monetary energy is secure in that system. So if you could get someone to that like fundamental level of understanding, it becomes like obvious. Why would I ever hold money that somebody else could print to infinity and thus debase entirely from me and steal from me entirely? I wouldn't want to do that. That's incredibly frightening, actually. And that's incredibly insecure.
Well articulated, brother. That is bang on. You nailed it. Everybody should rewind and just listen to that answer again, because really what you fear, it's actually solving, right? So it often takes time to internalize that, but what you're afraid of, Bitcoin is actually helping solve and eliminate. So go back and spend some time internalizing and thinking through that. Last question for you, brother, and then we'll talk a little bit about your upcoming book and where people can find you in your newsletter, and let you get out of here. So let's go full Nietzsche to wrap this up. If Bitcoin is the Ubermensch of money, overcoming the old systems, what's the last man it leaves behind, and should we mourn the loss of them?
The chairman of the Federal Reserve, or it's just somebody completely unplugged that has no idea what Bitcoin is or what fiat is, which is just somebody living in the Amazon down in Brazil or something. But yeah, I think it's somebody so latched onto the teat and so desiring power and money and authority that comes with the fiat system from a top-down way that they just can't admit it. They can't admit that they would lose that power. Of course, it actually gives them more sovereign power in a much truer and beneficial way if they tap into Bitcoin, but that might just be what they're used to. And then did you have a second part of the question?
No, just should we mourn the loss of that?
Should we mourn the loss?
Clearly not.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah. So Bitcoin truly does present, a better, brighter, more hope-filled future for everybody that chooses to embrace it.
Period.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to leave everybody with, or?
No, I mean, if you're not curious about Bitcoin, I would get curious about Bitcoin and explore it for yourself. See what you find. It's been quite fruitful and beneficial for me, and it's such an awesome world to live in. It's such a peaceful state to exist in, and I sleep as well as could be.
Awesome, man. Well, stay with me. We're going to wrap the show up by giving away some sats here from the sponsor of the show, Bitcoin Well, fully self-custody Bitcoin platform. So we're going to run a quick ad read for the first time, and then we're going to give away some sats. And then Cole is going to tell you where you can find him, connect with him, and read all of his musings. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitcoin Well. I love Bitcoin Well because they are a Bitcoin-only company. They support both Lightning and on-chain transactions, have no hidden fees, and are self-custody only, meaning they'll never hold on to your Bitcoin. It goes straight to your wallet. Join me over on Bitcoin Well to start stacking sats today by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Beautiful. Now, going to share the screen for anybody watching on video, and we're going to give away some sats. Get your Lightning wallets ready. Wallet of Satoshi, Aqua, anything that allows you to interact with the Lightning Network. We're going to play the Wishing Well. We're going to redeem 500. And the first person that scans the QR code is going to win some sats. We've got 210 sats here. And if you were lucky enough to snag this first, drop a comment on the video or on the podcast and let us know that you won. Awesome, man. Thanks so much, Cole, for stopping by for a chat with me. I enjoyed this immensely. This was really, really captivating stuff. Interesting to go down all these rabbit holes with you. And drop your socials and where everybody can connect with you, and tell us a bit about your upcoming book release and anything else that you want to leave with us.
Yeah, I think first it always amazes me that we give out Satoshis today. It's not like it's anything wrong, but I think it's kind of like how we look at Satoshis. Like there was a site, I think, 10, 12 years ago that gave away free Bitcoins and like
Yes.
Bitcoins plural. And now we're like, oh my gosh, the people got Bitcoins for free. Eventually, those 210 sats that you just gave away will be like, oh my gosh, someone just received 210 sats for free. That's insane. So that's pretty awesome. And I had this wheel on the Fold app where I spin and receive free sats. It's like 5, 10, 15, 20 sats a day. But I look at it at least like I'm earning 5, 10, 15, $20 a day.
Yeah.
And really, Bitcoin will go beyond that in purchasing power. So it's like, why would I not? And it's kind of just fun, anyways. But yeah, social media, I'm on X at Cole_Walmsley. That's the only social media I'm on right now. I have a YouTube channel where I'll be posting some podcast episodes. I'm sure I'll have you on because this was a really fun chat and I really enjoyed it. Other than that, you can connect with me in Austin, Texas if you find me out in the wild. And then, yeah, working on the Bitcoin thesis on the grindstone there, really, really enjoying it, really enjoying creating it. And I'm sure that's what I'm going to tap into right after I hang up this call. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. The newsletter Beyond Infinity is on my Twitter page as well. Would recommend subscribing to that. That's where we kind of go deeper on some more niche stuff outside of Bitcoin and even within Bitcoin as well. It's a fun time.
Yeah, and that's where I found you, was through your newsletter, and I highly suggest that y'all subscribe to that. Spend the time to read it. It's not fluff, it's pure signal, no noise, and keep your eyes open for Cole's book. It's going to be one that you're going to want to read over and over again, and share with people that you know and love, right? I think it's going to be something that everybody should read for themselves, but also spread around and spread the ideas that Cole talks about. So it was a pleasure, Cole. We'll talk again soon, brother.
Sounds good. Really enjoyed it.